If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Truckers, drivers, and people who drive at night, what is the strangest or creepiest thing you've seen or experienced in the middle of nowhere? Well, my friend was shaken. I pushed my foot on the gas pedal and slowly began to move forward. I kept my gaze to the left, where the animal walked. I pulled into my parents' house, and we both quickly ran into the house. The two of us never talked about this incident again. I had an experience when I was 18 on Riverdale Road, which is said to be one of the most haunted roads in America. My friend and I were driving down the road, going slowly with our windows down. I was in the passenger seat, and he was driving. I remember we were talking and laughing, and I looked at him and watched his smile fade into a look of fear as he looked past me out my window into the field. He grabbed a flashlight, which he kept in his center console to shine at red lights to make them switch faster, and shined it into the field. I looked out my window to see what he was seeing, and I swear to God we both saw a coyote-looking thing running on its hind legs towards our car. My friend floored it. We went like 80 miles per hour till we got off the road and pulled over at a gas station, where we both just questioned if we both saw what the other person saw. 7 years later, I still question my sanity. Has anyone else experienced anything like this on Riverdale Road? Driving through a dark ass in Utah, I'm not the least bit tired, so I can't attribute what I saw to being fatigued. I've got LED bulbs in my headlights, so everything is bright in front of me. For whatever reason, I reached down to the radio to turn it instead of the steering wheel controls, and for a second, my eyes were off the road to look for a channel. I saw a man in my peripheral view on the road, fully dressed to the nines, like the young sheriff or marshal in the movie Tombstone when Kurt Russell and them first show up. I was just standing in the road. I'm fully loaded in a flatbed and lock every bit of all my wheels up while dropping some mud in my pants. My eyes are closed as I'm doing this, and I'm expecting to hear something smash my front end, but there's no sound. I'm fully stopped now and get out with my flashlight, Streamlight Stinger, bright as duck. I see no front end damage, I see no blood, no nothing. I walk along the sides, looking into ditches and SHT, and I don't see anything. I keep looking for like 30 to 45 minutes, and I see nothing. I also get chills, super colds, even though my adrenaline initially had me burning up. After concluding there wasn't anything there, I got in my truck, got ready to drive off, and looked down at my radio, and the station showed 99.9. At first, I didn't think anything of it but realized the numbers were upside down. I needed to play some children's tunes just to take the creepy ducking edge off. So Gilman Springs Road is one of the few major roads leading into Hemet, California, and it's not only a very dangerous road with many deaths, but it's also haunted. Me and my girlfriend go to Disney often, so on the way back home, usually at night, we drive through Gilman Springs to come back into Hemet. And we always swear we see shadows or ghosts on the sides of the roads, but we chalk it up to us being tired from a long day and our eyes playing tricks on us. Well, we drove with one of our friends recently to a Disney D23 event, and on the way home, we of course drove through Gilman Springs. Well, when we got home, our friend, who sat in the passenger seat, told us that she saw a creepy pale face smiling from the back seat of the car right next to me, who sat in the back while my girlfriend drove. And as she told us this, we literally saw goosebumps form all over her body, so we knew she was being serious, and this shit scared the duck out of us. Now we know it might not just be our eyes playing tricks on us. The road is also on Native American land and has a canyon called Massacre Canyon, and Scientologists own a huge establishment and castle near there as well. A lot of creepy shit goes on there. In 2008, my girlfriend and I took a road trip and spent a couple days in Atlanta, Georgia. On the drive back home to Florida, we both experienced some kind of paranormal contact. We both agree on what we heard and experienced. We started the drive back around sunset. Once on the highway, my girlfriend fell asleep almost immediately and was curled up in her hoodie in the passenger seat of my Ford Ranger. I drove for a couple hours, and I was a little tired, so I started dialing through the radio stations at low volume. The reception on most stations was horrible, and the ones I found that had decent reception were country music. I turned it off. A couple minutes after I turned the radio off, I heard a faint sound of a human voice. I had both windows up, and I checked the radio, and it was completely off. I thought my girlfriend was maybe talking in her sleep, so I thought nothing of it. Then, about 10 seconds later, I hear it again. It sounds like a voice. Then, 10 seconds later, it was a little louder. Then again, I could make out the words. Then it comes again, even louder, in a voice that sounds like unimaginable pain and suffering, like someone gasping on their last breath. Kill me. My girlfriend jumps up in her seat wide awake with this puzzled and frightened look on her face and says, "What is that? Turn that off." She just stares at the radio. I say, "It is off." Then the voice comes again. "Kill me." We both look at each other like, what the hell is happening? She reaches out to turn the radio off, even though it is off, and as her hand is reaching toward the radio, it turns on full blast, fuzz, and horrible screeching sounds. All by itself. She never touched it. It was a full blast, as loud as possible, and a horrible sound. We both jump, totally freaked out, and I slam my hand on the front of the radio, and it turns off. I hit the power button. At this point, we are both totally freaked out. I pull over at the next exit, which is a rest stop. We sit in my truck and calm ourselves down, and we decide that it must have been pirate radio, even though we both know that the radio was off. I thought I was tripping or having some mental issue when I first heard it, but when she woke up and we both experienced it at the same time, I knew it was some kind of EVP or something. Something was making contact. We get home safe, and a couple days later she calls me and tells me that she Googled the little country town we stopped at the rest stop in because she kept thinking about it. She would do that, and, of course, a family was murdered in their car at that rest stop. The guy who did it was later convicted and executed by the state of Georgia. She thinks it has something to do with the murders. I'm not sure. It did happen right before that exit for the rest stop. We both still remember this experience in the same way. So weird. What do you think it was? I have two, both from the same area. First, I saw a big cat. I live in Australia. A few years ago, I was dating a lady who lived on a farm about 20 minutes out of my town. One night I was driving out there and saw something in the middle of the road ahead of me, so I slowed down. Pretty quickly, I realized it was a cat, but I thought it was closer than it was because of its size. It was large and stood about 60 to 70 centimeters tall. It was dark colored, had a large head, and had a long tail. It was eating some roadkill and quickly looked into my headlights, then disappeared into the bushes on the side of the road. Without getting out of my car, I swung around and flashed my headlights into the bushes, but I couldn't see it. I reported it to the Big Cat Sightings group, but I never saw it again. Secondly, one night, around 1130 p.m., I was heading out there when I noticed something ahead on the road. I slowed down, and as I got closer, I saw two people in their 40s wearing all white but dirty clothes and no shoes, just walking along the road. Their eyes had that maddened look about them, and the woman's long blonde, grayish hair looked like a bird's nest. I stopped next to them, wound down my window, and asked if they were okay, but they seemed oblivious to me and my car. They were staring into the distance and walking. Again, I asked if they needed help, as there was nothing around this area. They just kept moving forward at a slow pace. So I moved on. I was worried about them, and about 5 minutes later, I decided to go back. They were still walking along the road, fixated on something in the distance. I beeped the horn this time, but there was no reaction. I opened the window again and said, "Where are you going?" "Nothing." I told them to get off the road, it was dangerous, and I went to my girlfriend's house. She had no idea who they were. Nor had I heard anything like it. There are rumors of a cult out there, so that's my guess of where they'd come from or where they were going. Virginia. There is a 7-mile stretch of road in Delaplane, Virginia, that I have driven through at night about 10 times. The road has some farms, nice houses, and, I think, a state park with horseback riding trails. 4 times while driving on this road at night, I have been thoroughly spooked. The first and scariest was about 3 a.m., and a car was driving sporadically behind me, trying to get me to pull over. He drove on the wrong side of the road and cut me off multiple times. I got behind me and tapped my back bumper a few times. I did not ducking stop, and that shit was scary. Second, I saw the classic white lady at about 2 a.m. with no other car in sight. I was standing with my back to the road. Third, I saw what I thought was a UFO. A light off in the distance kept getting closer and closer to me, like it was headed right for me. I was very spooked, but it turned out to be a guy on a motorcycle. Fourth, I saw another white lady, and I swerved my car and almost drove into a ditch. My grandfather stopped driving on big roads after this happened. He hated highways and always took back roads. I was really young and in the back of the truck cab. Suddenly, my grandfather slammed the brakes. At the end of what was about to be a sharp L curve was a man drenched in blood, cutting up a roadkill with a small saw. What freaked my grandfather out was, this man was in dark clothes, so we didn't see him until he was 20 feet away. It was past midnight. He stared at the car for a few seconds before returning to what he was doing. The man's mouth was clearly covered in blood, indicating he had eaten some of the raw deer. My grandfather told me to close my eyes in case he had to run this guy over. He cracked the window a quarter inch and asked the guy to move. And then I heard my grandma shriek, "Just go, just go." I looked up, and the man was now standing and had what I can only assume was a chunk of deer he was eating like an apple. My grandfather floored it, missing the guy by less than a foot. Yesterday, I was riding my bike back home at 12:30 a.m. It was also a bit foggy that night, but still clear enough to see what's happening in front of me. I live in Belgium and have to ride through a rural area on a dark, quiet road that leads to a big forest that I also have to go through. It is known in my village that in the forest, many suicides have happened, mostly by hanging. I was coming back from being with friends. And it was about 1:30 in the morning. Before you get off that road, you drive on a small stretch of street that is inhabited and completely lit by street lamps. While I was driving on the lit part of the road, a black shadow that looked like a person appeared 20 meters in front of me in the middle of the road. There was nothing around the road that could cause a shadow, so there was no logical response to that shadow. The most punishing thing was that the spot where it was standing was completely illuminated. The phantom hovered 50 centimeters or so in the air and was, I think, 2 meters high. And she looked like a person. I drove on toward the phantom because I had to go that way because it was the shortest way home. And the shum stayed put, and I drove in front of it. Then I looked back, and it was gone. My mom told me afterwards that a good friend of my family also hanged himself there 5 years ago. Maybe it was him. I can still see it in front of me when I close my eyes. Blue Mist Road near my hometown. It's out in the backwoods of Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh. It's not really a road, driving on it is like off-roading. Gravel lined with massive potholes or craters is not maintained. There is an enormous tree that stands out on the road, and it is said that tree was used by the KKK to hang many people outside of their ideology. The lore is that the place is haunted by their spirits. My senior year in high school, my buddy and I decided to go check it out. We took my piece of SHT Datsun 310 down the road. We had to drive so slowly, or my car was going to fall apart. We started out laughing, but it got quiet in the car pretty fast as we approached the tree. I would have loved to just floor it and GTFO out of there, but the road made that impossible. It's dark, we are in the middle of nowhere, and it's 1987. No cell phones. It was honestly terrifying. I can still hear my buddy asking or pleading to go faster. His voice was several octaves higher than usual. This is not a short road, either. In total, it was like a 10-minute drive that felt like an hour.
Holy F, I just Googled it for the first time ever.
I thought it was kind of a local thing. Looking at these pictures now gives me chills. I was in the USAF stationed in Omaha in the late 1980s. At the time, I was hanging out with my roommate and another friend. My name is Tracy. My roommate's name was Tracy. The girl we hung out with was named Stacy. When we were together, everyone always thought we were lying and being the silly teenagers we were, but we always found it funny. One weekend, we decided to take a road trip to Kansas City, Missouri. We were speeding down the highway, laughing and singing at the top of our lungs. We were happy and having the time of our lives. Stacy was driving, and she had a bit of a lead foot and must have been going too fast because before long, a state trooper pulled up behind us and turned on his lights. Stacy immediately pulled over. By the time the officer made it to her window, she had already had her license and registration in hand and the window down. The officer looked at her and then at me and Tracy. Then he said, "I want you to follow me. Don't try to run off, or you all will be going to jail." He then went and got back in his car. Needless to say, the three of us were puzzled and talking amongst ourselves, wondering why he just didn't take Stacy's identification and write her a ticket. The officer pulled out slowly, and we dropped in behind him and followed him down the road. He drove a few miles, then exited the highway. He drove a little ways and turned onto a dirt road that was surrounded by stalks of corn. We all stopped talking as we became more alarmed. However, being young and scared, and since he was a police officer, we continued to follow him. The officer drove for some time down this dirt road and then pulled into an area that had a big, beat-up old barn. As he stopped and we stopped behind him, a group of men with shotguns exited the barn. It wasn't until that point that we realized we were in mortal danger, and panic set in. The officer walked back to our car and told Stacy to get out and follow him to his car. As she got out, she looked at me and Tracy, and there was sheer terror on her face. She followed him to his car, and he motioned for her to get in on the passenger side. She did. Tracy and I were crying, and as the armed men stood on the side of the car looking at us, we began quietly praying for God to protect the three of us. We prayed that Stacy wasn't being hurt and that somehow they would let us leave. After some minutes, Stacy bolted out of the officer's car, ran back to the car, and jumped in the driver's seat. She was crying hysterically. So, of course, Tracy and I began crying harder. The officer got out of his car and walked back to our car, this time to Tracy's window, as she was in the front passenger seat. He asked, "Is it true all of you are in the Air Force?" To which Tracy replied, "Yes, sir." The officer calmly said, "Get out of here and go back to where you came from. I better not see you again." As soon as he finished, Stacy turned on the car, whipped it around, and sped back down the dirt road. She somehow navigated back to the highway. As she drove back toward the base, the silence was only broken by an occasional sob from one of us. Stacy drove for a while, and as soon as we crossed back over into Nebraska, she pulled over on the side of the highway. Then she began to sob heavily. Tracy and I hugged her and asked if she was hurt in any way. She shook her head. She wasn't hurt. After she calmed down enough, she told us what happened in the police car. After she got in the car, she offered the officer her identification and told him she was sorry for speeding. He took her information and then asked her, "What are you doing with those two N-words?" Stacy was white. She explained that we were on a road trip. He then told her that if she would do certain favors for him, he might let us go with a warning. At that point, Stacy had a complete meltdown. I guess while he was waiting for her to calm down, he finally looked at her identification and saw that she had also given him her military ID. He asked her if we were all in the military, and between sobs, she said we were. He asked where we were stationed, and she told him off at AFB. He then told her to go back to her car. As we sat there after Stacy told us what occurred, I think it hit all three of us at the same time that the only thing that saved us was that we were in the military and stationed at a nearby base. We hugged each other and cried until we could not cry anymore. We didn't report what had happened. Again, we were teenagers and didn't think we would be believed by a law enforcement officer. We never talked about it after that day. That incident has haunted me for years. All of the what ifs. But as I have gotten older, what haunts me more is the thought that others may not have been as lucky as we were. My dad's friend Ray was a long-haul trucker and would drop in on us every now and again when he was in the area. We always knew it was him when his truck came rumbling down our quiet, residential street. He always had stories to tell, but the best ones were the ones after all the kids had gone off to sleep, and it was just him and my mom and dad hanging out on the porch with a bottle of Presidente while Ray smoked. My sister and I would creep into my parents' bedroom, whose window faced out over the porch, and quietly listen as they talked. We had to wait a good while till Ray got to talking about the good stuff. Usually it was wild tales about people he met on the road. Hitchhikers and runaways, a stray dog that he kept with him for a while until one day it sauntered off and never came back. Sometimes he told ghost stories, like the one where an old lady sat beside him at a diner, and he looked around to see who she was with, and a flustered lady came and led her away, briefly apologizing to him. Later that night, he kept catching glimpses of the old lady sitting on the passenger seat. But when he turned his head, she wasn't there. He chalked it up to being tired and sleepy, but he said he kept seeing her for the next couple of weeks until a friend told him to talk to her and ask what she wanted. So he did, and he never saw her again. Or the one where he saw his own dad, long since passed away, waving him down as he drove through Refugio, a small Texas town. He chalked it up to exhaustion too, and he pulled over to stretch his legs and get a quick bite to eat. He was at a small gas station eating a hot dog or something when he said he saw state troopers barreling through town, sirens silent, lights flashing. He found out there had been some kind of shootout, and he thinks if he'd kept going, he might have ended up in the midst of it. But the one story that still pops into my head from time to time, when I least expect it, and usually when I'm alone, is when he was driving through Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. He said it was just getting dark when he saw the station wagon flipped over on the side of the road and a semi pulled off to the side on the opposite side of the road. There are no emergency vehicles yet. He pulled over in front of the station wagon and called it in on his CB, then ran back to see if he could help. He noticed a young woman circling the station wagon, looking distraught. He asked her if she was okay and who else was in the car, but she didn't answer, she just walked around looking lost. He turned back to the vehicle and saw that the driver was conscious but bleeding from his head. He helped get him out, and together they got two kids out of the backseat. The kids were conscious but asked for their mom. That's when Ray remembered the young woman and turned back to look for her, but she was gone. Emergency services arrived, and he stood by and watched while they pulled the wagon upright. He left when he saw the lifeless body of the young woman pulled out of the wreck. He said he couldn't sleep for weeks after, and only with the light on. In fact, that's around the time he picked up a random stray dog to keep him company because he didn't like the thought of being alone. There's a back road in Pennsylvania nicknamed Devil's Road, but it was formerly known as Cossert Road. You can Google this road and read about its paranormal history. M. Night Shyamalan even filmed The Village here. To give a brief summary, the DuPont family owned a mansion on Cossert Road years ago. It was nicknamed the Cult House because of strange activities that occurred on the property, including reported black magic and neighbors hearing unexplained demonic voices in the surrounding woods. Locals have even said that the DuPont family married their cousins to ensure that their wealth would stay in the family. Like any typical teen, I wanted to investigate the legends surrounding this creepy road. It was the Saturday before Halloween in 2011 that my friends and I decided to take a drive out to Cossert Road. It was around 10 p.m. when we arrived there, a completely dark and wooded area with no houses in sight. My two friends and I drove down the back road all alone, taking notice of the many trees that were sprayed with graffiti. About 5 minutes later, we arrived at the Cult House. I told my friend to park the car on the side of the road so we could get a better look at the mansion. We stepped out and noticed a large gate with a metal fence that surrounded the entire front property. There was a long driveway behind the gate that continued uphill towards the mansion. We could barely see the house because of the trees that lined the driveway, blocking our view. My friend then pointed to the right of the house and told us to look at the large bonfire in the woods. I peered over in the direction that he was pointing and noticed 8 to 10 people surrounding the fire. What became very peculiar to me was the fact that these people were all dressed in red hooded outfits. I then realized that this must have been some kind of cult gathering. My friends and I were in complete shock at what we were witnessing. A few minutes later, we began hearing vehicles approaching us from the surrounding cornfields. My friends and I ran to the car and jumped inside. I turned around in the passenger seat and witnessed 2 black SUVs appear out of the cornfields and onto the road. I could see each driver wearing the same red hood but was unable to make out any facial features. I told my buddy to start the car and go as fast as possible, as this was a threatening situation. We took off and approached 50 miles per hour on the windy back road, but could find no relief as the SUVs were right behind us. Their high beams blinded our sight as we made our way through the wooded backroads. The one SUV went into the other lane and sped up to pass us. Now in front, the SUV put his brakes on to force us to stop. My friend panicked and decided to switch lanes and speed up to avoid the driver. Driving in the opposite lane, we were able to escape both drivers. I looked in the mirror to see that they were slowing down and becoming distant. The road was coming to an end, but we had no intention of slowing down. My buddy stopped at the last second and turned left onto a new back road. I turned around and could see that each SUV had stopped at the end of the road. They turned off their headlights and sat there, blocking us from entering Cossert. We just kept driving until we reached the main highway. That confrontation left us speechless, as we couldn't find the words to describe the fear we were experiencing. To this day, I will not return to Devil's Road. I'm a truckie, mainly do all road train work from Brisbane up around the top of Australia to Perth and along the Nullarbor. Seen some strange shit but nothing like this, mate. I never really ventured into Victoria and NSW due to scalies and revenue raising, but I had to do an express run to Melbourne via Sydney and had to come back up the Newell Highway to collect a load for Toowoomba. My boss said I don't mind if you pull up before you get around Coonabarabran, as some drivers choose not to go through at night, with a giggle in his voice. I said, she'll be right, mate. Plenty of hours left, all good, so I hooked in. I was in between Coonabarabran and Narrabri, and a Sheila, out of nowhere, flagged me down hitchhiking looking to go home to her camp, and I thought, WTF is this shit? I said, hop in, and the hair stood up all over my body with an instant thought I should have kept going. She stunk like nothing I had smelled before, and the cab was destroyed with stench. She didn't say a word and just gazed ahead. About 20 kilometers down the road and not passing one vehicle, the old woman said, "Here, this is it," and I had to stop in a gully, and off she went with a bag. No thanks, nothing. I looked around, but there was not a ducking thing on site with no lights, tracks, or anything. I was glad she was gone because my gut was almost ready to explode. I pulled up on the other side of Narrabri for a few hours and decided to get going at daybreak, but I had to sleep in the trailer because the smell was horrible. I woke up to another truckie kicking his tires doing a pre-start, and I climbed out, to which he replied, "Duck mate, they're working you pretty hard." I continued to explain the cab's absolutely stinking from the hitchhiker lady, and he went pale white and told me exactly where it happened. I said, "Yes, mate," and he said, "Yes, mate, that nutter was run over back in 1993 by a truck." I gulped and thought, duck me, what is going on? Is this ducker for real? This was in 2014, and to this day, I have never been anywhere near that part of NSW. The pillage of Princess is real, for sure. I told the boss, and he laughed and said, "There's a coldies in the fridge, so hurry the duck up." He showed me the camera in the truck, which shows the passenger door open and close by itself as I'm looking across talking, but nothing on the video of her, just thin air. This happened to my friends and me 1 year ago, when we were in high school. We were all 17 years old and bored. We'd play video games a lot, but sometimes we'd just go driving around. The town we lived in wasn't really big, and it was surrounded by country roads. Those were the best roads to be on. No cops, nobody around, just us and my friend Drew's truck playing loud music. One night we were on one of these country roads when, off in the distance, we could see that someone was standing there in the middle of the road. Drew slowed down. The guy in the road didn't move, so Drew pulled his truck to a complete stop. Now this is a pitch black night, so we couldn't see much, and the guy was just outside of the headlights. But we could tell he was still standing there and facing us. Now that we are 3 regular-sized guys, we shouldn't be too freaked out by one guy in the middle of the road, but you never know who might be out there. I mean, who stands in the middle of a dirt road in the middle of the night? So, we're sitting there with the truck idling. Just go on and go around him, some of us say. But really, this is getting creepy. Suddenly, the guy takes a step towards us, drops down on all fours, and starts running towards our truck. Man, we all freak and start shouting at Drew, "Go back! Go back!" Drew throws the truck in reverse and slams on the gas. We're all screaming, and we can still see this thing running towards us on all fours like an animal or something. I swear to God we drove for at least 2 miles like that, at high speed and in reverse. Finally, we can't see this thing anymore. Drew swings the truck around, and we speed back to my house. We ran up to my room, shut the door, and spent the rest of that night and many more nights wondering what in hell that was. It happened last year when my family decided to go on vacation in the northern part of the country. We usually just stay where we live because it's super close to the beach. It's the southernmost point of our country, so the weather is always nice. Therefore, there really is no reason for us to travel a lot. However, last year I had made a friend that talked wonders about the north, so, through a lot of talking, I convinced them to go on a road trip and see the north of the country. The place we would be staying was on the countryside, so we had to drive through some abandoned and very oddly creepy places with very bumpy roads. Even though the view wasn't anything mesmerizing, all I had to entertain myself was my music and looking out the window while picturing some music videos in my head, so that's what I did. For a very long and boring hour, all I did was look out the window and wonder how long it would take to reach our destination, yet out of nowhere I finally noticed something that was different from the rest. It was a relatively small farm with some cows walking around, yet there was no one in sight. That's when my dad asked me something pretty ordinary. "So, have you already told your friend that we will be visiting up north?" I gave him a short answer, simply saying that I had and that he wanted to meet me in person while I was staying there. My dad just nodded and kept driving. Not even 20 minutes later, the farm once more showed up from the side of the road. I was pretty confused, but because I wasn't paying attention to the road, I simply thought that my dad had taken the wrong turn and we had to drive by again. That's when he asked me the same exact question. "So, have you already told your friend that we will be visiting up north?" I was even more confused and gave him an even shorter answer, and he replied with the same exact nod. Feeling super odd about the situation, I decided to check out our location when the damn farm showed up again. We were already at a fairly long distance from the last place I had seen the farm, and, you guessed it, my dad asked the same damn question for the 3rd time. I answered with a question of my own and asked if we were lost, to which he just said no and insisted on his first question as if I hadn't already answered it twice before. I just said yup because I was getting sort of scared at that point and was preparing myself to live in that situation a 4th time, but it didn't happen. That haunted my mind, and I even told my friend what had happened. I told my dad I wanted him to drive by that same road when we got back home a week later, and the damn farm showed up once. I'm still super skeptical about it all, but that still bugs my mind when I think about it. No ghost stories per se, but I've been spooked a few times while staying in really remote parking spots in northern Ontario. One was just a dirt and gravel pullout along Highway 17 that was only usable for a few months a year. I pulled in and turned off the truck, then hopped out to take a pee. As I walked around the back of the truck, I saw a figure walking along the highway in the dark. The lot is at a T-junction and miles from any towns. I walked back to the front of the truck and looked his way again, but nobody was there anymore. I've never gotten back in the truck so fast in my life. A few years ago, I had a strange and unsettling experience that I still can't fully explain. It was late at night, and I was driving home from a friend's house in a rural area. The road was completely deserted, with no other cars or houses in sight. The only light came from my headlights, cutting through the darkness. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young girl, maybe around 10 years old, wearing a white dress that looked strangely out of place. She had long, dark hair that covered most of her face. I slowed down, concerned that she might be lost or in trouble. I rolled down my window and called out to her, asking if she needed help. She didn't respond but slowly lifted her head, revealing a pair of pitch black eyes that seemed to absorb all the light around them. A chill ran down my spine, and every instinct told me to get away from there as quickly as possible. I sped off, heart pounding, and didn't look back. When I reached home, I told my family about the encounter, but they dismissed it as a trick of the light or my imagination running wild. However, a few weeks later, I heard similar stories from other locals about seeing a girl with black eyes on that same stretch of road. To this day, I avoid that. I'd never heard her say before, "Be careful, that road is dangerous." Being a macho guy, I brushed off the comment as concern. Besides, it was 10 p.m. on Labor Day night. Who was going to be on the road? I was off in my single cab truck with a bench seat, passing 2 cities with no problems. After the freeway gave way to the connecting highway, the traffic thinned as I thought it would, and I was pretty much alone besides the rare car going in the opposite direction. As I was about 3 to 5 minutes from my friend's work, I was getting close to a few tight turns up a gradual incline that led up to the town. I was passing a red barn-like old store that was long abandoned. I noticed something moving in the driver's side view mirror with my peripheral vision. This caught my attention since my truck bed was empty. I thought it was a rope, but I knew there were none in the bed. When I looked directly at the mirror after a turn, I saw what was waving in the wind. It was there for a fleeting moment, but it seemed to be what looked like an arm draped over the side of the truck bed, hanging down limp and wafting with the wind. Alarming? Yes, but I was even more horrified to see that the arm noticed me noticing it. Then the arm retracted itself into the truck bed, out of view. At this point, I was almost into the town. Funny, this town has a steep drop-off, which I had noticed with many crosses on the turn during the day. I never gave much thought to why. Losing control on the last turn seemed impossible during the day. Now I knew why. I'd heard of similar stories in my area of hitchhikers who appear in back seats. But I had a single cab, and those tales never worried me. Knowing those tales, I knew better than to look in the rearview mirror. So I placed my chin on the steering wheel and finished off the last 2 minutes with my head there so as not to look out of any mirror. I arrived and parked outside. My friend joined me. He handed me the food and thanked me for coming. I said nothing of what I saw. He would have called me a liar, as he drove that road often. We talked and laughed. 15 minutes or so into the ride, we were transitioning to the freeway that led to our hometown. He was adjusting the radio when he suddenly jumped up, turned to the truck bed, and yelled, "Hit the brakes. There is someone in the truck bed." I tapped the brakes so the brake lights would go on. His fright made mine come rushing back. He told me, "I saw the shadowy outline of someone sitting in the truck bed looking right at the back of your head. However, when I hit the brakes, there was nothing there." At this point, I am nearly soiled. Since I never told him about what happened on the way to work, I did after, and we both sat quietly in shock. Nothing else happened that night. But a few years later, a coworker of mine wrecked a company truck on that road. At the same spot where all the crosses were and where I saw the arm. When he got back to work after his doctor cleared him, I asked him what he saw. His eyes grew wide, and he said, "Nothing." But his reaction said otherwise. I told him I saw it too. But he wouldn't open up. The town has also since removed almost all of the crosses. I still avoid driving on that road alone. My friend and I decided to go off-roading one night due to boredom. There was a big thunderstorm that had just passed, and everything was drenched. We are driving up the mountain to this local off-road spot. Imagine a 5-mile, twisty gravel road. There is one spot where the trees are clear, and you can see everything around you for miles. As we approach this spot, there appears to be a thick white cloud or fog bank, but it is small, about 50 feet in diameter. I slow down, as it is so thick we cannot see through it. The instant we drive into it, everything electrical dies. Headlights, gauges, engines, radios, etc. We both look at each other as I attempt to restart the Samurai, but nothing happens. At this point, it seems like maybe a battery cable came loose, so I got my phone out to use the flashlight. What do you know? It's off, too. My friend checks his phone too, and it's dead and won't power up. We are starting to get a little freaked out. Unsure of what we should do, we just sit there. About a minute passes, and suddenly the fog slowly moves to the left. We couldn't tell this at the time because we were still inside it blind. The instant the fog cleared, everything electrical came back to life. The headlights come on, the radio starts playing, and our phones start powering up. I reach forward and turn the key, and it fires up without problem. I back up and see whatever it was we drove into floating off to the left at about walking speed. I still don't know what it is to this day, but it was pretty strange and incredible timing for it to be a coincidence. Clinton Road, West Milford, New Jersey. When you talk to most people about North Jersey, they will tell you that the most haunted location is Clinton Road. This road has so many tales, legends, and myths that it's hard to keep track of them all. One just needs to head down, or up, Route 23 into West Milford to see the road signs for the legendary road. Once making the turn, drivers will travel several miles through twists and turns in an unknown forest. The road itself is gorgeous during the day, with many locals using the forest or lakes for hiking, swimming, fishing, or just taking a spin in a boat. But once night falls, the darkness creeps within each tree, leaving much to the imagination. People have shared many tales of albino animals, hellhounds, big black trucks, and, of course, Dead Man's Curve, but few readers know the story behind them. Throw a penny, as legend has it, years ago, there was once a boy who enjoyed riding his bike up and down Clinton Road for its hills, curves, and amazing views. At the time, the road was seldom traveled because of its position up north. The boy would bring along his dog, a large Doberman whose coat was as black as night. The two would make stops throughout the road, jumping in the lake, and playing until one day disaster struck. While he was traveling with his companion down the road, he made a stop near a bridge, not to be confused with what is now known as Dead Man's Curve. A large black truck heading west towards Route 23 reached the bridge where the boy was standing. The driver, who had clearly been drinking, drifted, hitting the boy, causing him to fall from his bike and into the water, where he hit his head on the rocks. The driver of the truck, who panicked, drove away in a rush, leaving the young boy to drown. The dog, who was very close to the boy, dragged his dead body from the water and stood to cover the remains. By the time police found him, the aggressive dog wouldn't let anyone near the corpse. The police, unable to deal with the aggression, shot the dog in the head, killing it. The driver of the black vehicle was never found, and the boy was never truly identified. Paranormal activity is said to occur around the bridge where the boy was hit. It's said that a boy will manifest if you throw a coin into the stream from the bridge. It's also been said that when you throw a coin, the boy will throw it back at you. The hellhound, commonly believed to be the boy's dog, there have been numerous sightings of a large black beast with red eyes that has the ability to run as fast as most cars. This hellhound, as it is called, has been known to chase cars, ram the sides, and, in the blink of an eye, disappear into thin air. Hellhounds are often assigned to guard the entrances to the world of the dead, such as graveyards and burial grounds, or undertake other duties related to the afterlife or the supernatural. Most believe that seeing a hellhound or hearing its howl may be an omen or even a cause of death. The ghost truck, you're traveling down the road to see if anything will scare you, but so far, nothing interesting has happened. Then, without warning, a bright light appears in your rearview mirror. Someone is coming up close, speeding, and trying to run you off the road. You're racing through the curves at superhuman speed. Your heart is literally beating out of your chest. Then, without warning, it was gone. This is what we hear from thousands of our listeners. What the truck is or where it comes from, nobody knows. Is it the man who hit the young boy? The Iceman. On May 14, 1983, a bicyclist was traveling down the road when he came across a human body, confirmed later as Daniel Deppner, in the woods as a turkey vulture was eating him. After an autopsy was performed, ice crystals were found inside the body. The body had been frozen to hide the true date and cause of death. After further investigations, it was discovered that Daniel was killed by Richard Kuklinski, otherwise known as the Iceman. In accordance with his later statements, Kuklinski died in 2006. He performed the act of killing, freezing, and dumping the bodies hundreds of times. It leads to the question of how many potential unburied bodies could be lying in the woods. The castle. There are multiple hiking trails through the woods that lead to what is known as Cross Castle. Built over 100 years ago for unknown reasons, the building has since begun to decay with time. The building is littered with signs, symbols, and proof of unknown rituals. Many users have informed us that there are people who perform either satanic rituals or witchcraft at the location. Others say that it is grounds for a cannibalistic albino family that harms those who trespass. Clinton Road has been called the most terrifying road in the US and has been featured on Travel Channel's Most Terrifying Places in America too. There are many more legends, creatures, and unknown parts of the road. Oh, and don't expect to have any cell service while traveling through. Are you willing to travel this 10-mile stretch of pure blackness? Be my guest. Just know, you've been warned. Midwest Highway Hauntings. First experience. We were going home after seeing my in-laws move into their house. But the way we went home wasn't one we had ever taken before. Keep in mind that her parents live 2 hours away from where we live, so it's a bit of a commute. All throughout the drive, we were very uncomfortable. Long, winding roads with steep hills in the dark with no cars passing us ever. We start to drive through this tiny town. I couldn't have had a population of more than 1,000 people. There were 3 to 4 cemeteries in that little town alone. That being said, as we were passing through one of the cemeteries, we finally saw some headlights in the night. But they were round and pure white. It was almost as if it were a Ford Model T or similar car. We were a little relieved to see a fellow motorist on the road with us. But we were on hilly terrain. We saw it as we dipped down, but when we came back up, the headlights were no more, just gone. I looked to see if they turned off anywhere, but the road had no other branching streets. After that, we were freaked out to the max. We questioned each other, verifying what we both saw. Then we were mostly quiet afterwards. Second experience. We went to see her parents again and came home the regular way this time. But this was later at night. Around 11 p.m. at the beginning of July is my estimate. So, we're driving, and we see a white cross on the road. It's not a huge deal. Sad, but we see those a lot. But this time, after passing that, my headlights started to see someone walking on the side of the road. Guys, she was ducking pale. She had black hair over her face, a white shirt, and blue jeans. But her back was dark red, as was the back of her legs, and she was limping too. I didn't see any cars on the side of the road or any wrecked vehicles. But my wife said to keep going, so I did. Truth be told, I wasn't going to pick her up either. I never did any research to see why I saw her, but I don't want to uncover it and scare us even more. So, those are my experiences. It was probably not the scariest, but it sure got our blood pumping well. I was driving through Bumduck Nowhere, Kentucky on a rural highway at like 1 to 2 a.m., and I saw a young lady standing on the side of the highway trying to hitchhike. As soon as I saw her, I got major creepy vibes. I was like, hammer down, go go go. In an area like that on a rural highway in the middle of ducking nowhere, I was like 100% there's a dude hiding in the bushes. You stop to see what's up, and she starts giving you a sob story and distracting you so the dude in the bushes or tree line can sneak around, get the jump on you, and either stab you, shoot you, or just hit you over the head with a baseball bat, and then they throw you in the ditch unconscious or dead and take off with your truck or vehicle. And this was so in the middle of nowhere. It was an area without cell phone reception for 50 plus miles. You couldn't see any city or house lights nearby or in the distance. It was such a middle of nowhere area from civilization that if you stopped and turned off all your lights and it wasn't a full moon, you probably would barely be able to see your hand at the end of your outstretched to follow, and we were told the trip should take about 3 hours. While nothing went wrong on our drive, it seemed to take forever. I don't remember exactly at what point the woods started, but I do remember traveling through these woods for a long time, perhaps an hour. We were already well past the 3-hour time frame my friend had given us by the time we left the woods. When we finally reached my friend's college town, it had been nearly 4.5 hours since we'd left. We didn't get lost. We never hit traffic or stopped for more than a few minutes. But we quickly forgot about it since we were happy to spend the weekend with our friend. When the trip back was a little over 3 hours, we thought it was weird but didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until my next trip to visit that I realized something had been strange. I spent that whole next trip waiting for the long path through the woods that we had been on the first time, but it never appeared. Following the same directions as the first time, the entire trip took me about 3 hours, as did every other trip I made out there in the following years. I don't know what happened, and I've never been able to replicate it. I still wonder what happened and where we really were when passing through those woods. I cannot believe I fell asleep at my boyfriend's house. When I woke up, it was 1 a.m., and I had an 8 a.m. morning class, 2.5 hours away. I hate driving that far so late, or early. I also hate not getting enough sleep during the night. I got dressed and headed out. I had to admit, getting out of the city had never been so pleasant without the normal traffic, and it was cool enough to roll down a window without feeling like you're sitting in an oven. My music was blasting, there was nothing but the open road, me, and the occasional car or truck. Surprisingly, I wasn't even that tired. It was pitch black out. All you could see was what my headlights illuminated and a billion stars up above. It was beautiful. Driving across the plateau was my favorite part of the trip. During the daylight, you could see the vegetation start to change and some beautiful mountains in the background. The temperature had dropped a little, and I was singing along to my driving playlist at the top of my lungs, performing yet another great car concert. At the same time, I was constantly scanning the side of the road for coyotes or other wildlife that might wander into the road. If you've ever had close encounters with games, you know how important this is. Mid-song, I saw something move from the right side of the road. The entire thing happened extremely fast, but I remember every detail. My peripheral vision caught something white, causing unusual contrast just outside of the range of my headlights up ahead. As my eyes focused, I saw that it was on the move, towards the road. I still couldn't see what it was, but it sure had my attention at this point. I started to ease off the gas, just in case. I also turned down the music. As it moved into my headlights range, I could make out the figure of a woman in a white robe or dress, moving at a fairly quick pace. I could tell that if we both kept speed, we would collide up ahead. Between her long, flowing white dress and the shrubs on the side of the road, I couldn't see her legs, but I knew she was running, fast.
For a split second, I doubted my sanity.
A woman in a white dress, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? Maybe I was more tired than I thought. She was still running towards the road, but she seemed to have slowed down a little. I could now see her long blonde hair, and I was trying to get a look at her face, to see her expression, to figure out if she had taken notice of my car plowing down the freeway, to see if she was running towards me to get my attention, if she was scared, or if she was maybe laughing. It was all a late-night prank. Anything really, anything to help me figure out my next steps, after not hitting her, obviously. I slowed down considerably, but I still wasn't sure if I was actually going to stop the car. I had heard stories of women in distress stopping cars of people that were then never found alive ever again. No, thank you. She was almost on the edge of the road now, right ahead of me. I still couldn't make out her face, but I could tell she wasn't even looking in my direction. She hadn't noticed me or the car at all. I slammed on my brakes hard and swerved into the left lane, completely unnecessarily. The second she reached the pavement, she disappeared. Disintegrated. I just went up in smoke, right at the edge of the road. With my car barely rolling at walking speed, I searched the side of the road, no trace of a woman. I searched the road behind me, ahead of me, next to me, nothing. No woman, no other cars, nothing.
For a second, I thought about getting out and looking for her, but decided against it.
I took note of the milepost and drove off. Was that even real? Was I so tired that I was giving shape to the shadows? Why would shadows be bright white? If she was real, where did she go? I took out my cell phone and called the police. I decided to word the incident differently because I wanted them to actually drive out there and check and not have me committed instead. I told the operator that I was driving, and I thought I saw a woman wandering around next to the highway near the milepost I took note of. It seemed weird for someone to be out there in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night, but I was alone and didn't feel safe stopping. The answer I got was that highway patrol was not far from there, and they would check it out. I remembered checking the news for weeks, but nothing unusual about that area was ever reported, other than a few accidents or roadwork alerts on the highway. For years, I tried to convince myself that I imagined the whole thing, until I came across stories about the lady in white. I don't know if that's what it was, but I know I saw something that night. Has anyone here ever experienced anything like this? Did I encounter a skinwalker? So a few years ago, I was out with friends. We decided to go back to their place, which is a 30-minute drive through nothing but country, trees, and houses scattered here and there. I was driving alone, as we had originally met up. It was a cool summer night, so I was riding with my driver's side window down, probably because I had been smoking and left it down. I came to a stop sign at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere in the woods. I was taking a left and hadn't fully stopped when a canine-like thing, not a dog, not a coyote, came barreling full speed from within the woods at me. I stomped the gas. It was making a sound only heard in movies or a dog or wolf attack, and it never stopped running in pursuit of me even as I took off. It almost made it to my open window, and here's the thing, I could feel the hatred and intent rolling off it. I knew it had been waiting in the woods. I knew that it knew my window was down and its intention. It almost felt like a telepathic thought process was taking place. At the time I was so shaken, I screamed in fear, then cried and tried to convey what had happened to my friends at their house when I arrived, but to no avail. There is no capturing what happened or truly being able to explain it. The thought of a skinwalker had never crossed my mind, as I was pretty unfamiliar with the term, but I knew I had experienced something akin to the paranormal. Since then, I've heard a few stories about them, and some things in the stories have changed. Any thoughts? As I was in my late teens and early 20s, growing up in South Jersey, my friend group was always getting into ghost hunting on haunted roads and buildings around New Jersey and surrounding areas. We have always had some crazy experiences, and this is no different. We had the original friend group, plus another one of our friends. One night, while brainstorming what to do, we decided to go on a little ghost hunt trip in our area. Everyone knew of our friend group as the ones that would always be getting into these kinds of things, so we would always be getting tipped off by other friends outside of the group as to what places to check out. We were tipped off to do a little haunted road not far from us and decided, why not? It's better than nothing. So we all hop in the car and start the little trip toward the road. On the way, we happened to see a Wawa. Of course, we had to stop. Per usual, we were always hyping each other up to see if we could spook the others. While waiting in line, I'm messing with the one friend that's not in the ghost friend group, saying, you're scared to go. Out of nowhere, we hear, what's the little one scared of? I say little because the guys in the friend group were all abnormal sized humans, the smallest being roughly 6 feet 3 inches, and 240, while the little one was just a normal sized guy. These guys straight up look like they just don't belong there. Some back roads, Texas chainsaw looking fellas. We explained to the guy and his friend that we were going ghost hunting on a road. And simply put, they said, that's not scary, if you really want to be scared, go here instead. So we leave the Wawa, and hesitantly, we all agreed to actually go with the new hunt instead of the first tip. So as we get there, in the middle of the woods, we notice that there are trees cut down and laying on the sides parallel to the road. Deeper and deeper into the woods, pitch black, and the nervousness is really building. We pull up to this monument to commemorate a plane crash that happened there years ago. Dead silence, pitch black, only the light shining from the moon was our light other than the car lights. To put a little fear into us, we dared the driver to shut the lights off. Big mistake. So he completely shuts the car off. A few minutes go by, and we see this absolutely massive, and I mean massive, shadow crawl from behind the statue and start narrowing in towards us. When I say massive, I'm 6 feet 5 inches plus and 260, and this thing had me looking like a third grader. We all start panicking and zoom away in the car. A bit disoriented, we didn't realize we were driving deeper into the woods to where we'd hit a huge sand opening in which there were many ways to go from there. We decided it was best to turn around and try to map our way out. While doing so, our radio cuts out to almost old-time music, and I happen to look up in confusion. Seconds later, I see a white face. Not a typical white face, but almost like a Jabberwocky mask. Zero expression. And almost a see-through body, if that makes sense, just a face. And then another. And another. Now I don't know if it was us just being disoriented and seeing things, or if this was really happening. We all scream in unison. Let's get out of here. So we fly out of the sand and back on the same road where I mentioned the trees earlier. Only this time, on our way back, the trees weren't parallel to the road but actually in the middle of the road, blocking our exit. The driver, Joe, in a sports car, mind you, tells us hold on, and we are driving on the side of the road next to the woods in what I could best describe as defying gravity to make our escape. Now I don't know for certain if this place is legitimately haunted or if we were set up by those two guys earlier in the night, but two things are for certain. One is that I'd bet my life that it's a combination of both a haunting and a setup, and two is that I'll never go back there again to find out. This happened to me in December of 1969. I am a retired RN. I have experienced or witnessed many things that are beyond understanding, but I am also a critical thinker, and my story changed my thoughts on our limited view of reality forever. I was with my high school boyfriend on a typical Friday date night in Jeffersonville, Indiana. After socializing with friends at the local hangouts, we would ride out on the rural backroads that were located between downtown and my home in a subdivision. There were dairy farms and cornfields on either side of the road for about 6 miles. The few homes along this stretch sat on the back of properties, and there were a couple of equipment paths that led to small open fields that were our, teenagers, parking spots. Past that, the 2-lane narrow road was heavily wooded, with no homes or cleared property for 10 miles. This particular road had many curves and hills, which is typical for southern Indiana. The sparse population and teenage driving led to many accidents. There were no cell phones in those days, and the SOP if one saw an accident was to stop, help, and pray for another motorist to appear to flag down to be sent to the nearest house to call the police and ambulance, or transport the victims to the hospital yourself. It was a very cold December night, and snow flurries began. We left our parking area immediately, as my curfew wasn't to be missed. The remainder of our drive to my home was through the wooded area, and straight away we saw tail lights quite a bit ahead. As we were approaching the second sharp curve, we saw headlights shining from ground level and at an angle towards us. We immediately slowed and pulled as far off the road as possible. The grille was damaged, and the passenger side had struck trees. The headlights in the otherwise pitch black night were blinding. A fully restored, beautiful 1956 Chevy had apparently tried to take the curve too fast and had lost control. The car was off the road on its roof. My boyfriend, Greg, grabbed his flashlight, got another for me, along with a first aid kit from the trunk, and we ran to assist anyone that might be injured. The headlights had kept us from seeing how many passengers the car held. I clearly remembered my heart pounding from the adrenaline and my mind fearing injuries as nobody was shouting back to our calling out and nobody was attempting to get out of the car. I could smell the strong odor of gasoline and burned rubber. The engine was running and making a knocking sound. Greg got down on his knees and opened the driver's side door, and I opened the back. The car was empty. He reached up and turned on the ignition. The engine was now off, and the woods were silent. Nothing was making sense. Our headlights and flashlights were giving us light, and we started searching for a possible injured person. The windows were rolled up and starting to fog. Greg had already searched the interior. At this point, our assumption was that the driver must have gotten out, and we just hadn't seen him or her. We didn't understand why they hadn't answered us as we ran to help or why the car had been left running. We continued to search for a person around the wreck. We tried to go into the woods, but the underbrush and steep embankment were impossible to climb. At this point, we decided whoever was driving may have just walked away. We got back into Greg's car and drove slowly 3 miles back. Then I turned around and drove slowly for the next 6, fully expecting to find someone needing a ride home or a phone. We were relieved that the driver must not have been hurt, but we couldn't imagine why they didn't see us and how they had left on foot without us seeing them. No other vehicles had come down the road. At this point, the remaining road we drove was covered with snow, and we saw no tracks. There were no houses. We went to my house, where my parents were waiting, as I was really late. Greg told my father what had happened and then described the car and how beautifully restored it was in case he knew to whom it belonged. The whole incident just left us baffled. By the next day, we decided that maybe there was a house in the woods or a side road we missed. We were both just unsettled by it. We didn't know why we were worried about what now appeared to be a non-event. The next day, we went back to the scene of the accident. Both of us felt that we would find a house close by that had gone unnoticed, a side road, something. We didn't understand why we were still dwelling on it, but little did we know that quite the opposite was what we found. The car was still there but had been moved into a clearing in the trees. I will never understand what happened the night the Chevy whose taillights we followed hit that curve and rolled. There, it was still on its roof. The damaged grille and front fender are damaged. The accident occurred on Friday night. Here we stood on Sunday afternoon in the car. The paint was faded, the body was completely rusted through the majority of it, the tires were completely rotted, and the rims were rusted. The interior was dry rotted and covered with mold. The windows were gone, and the windshield was broken with a basketball-sized hole full of vines growing into and out of the car. The embankment we had tried to search was now a clearing, and further back into the woods was a small, abandoned 2-room shack. We later did a property search, but it only led us to owners who had bought acreage with a shack and a car on it. All we were left with was a lifetime of questions surrounding a cold December night. It has been years now, but that night still haunts me. This isn't my story, but my sister's. One night, she was driving home with a friend after a party. They were in the middle of nowhere, and there was forest on either side of the road. They noticed that a white dog kept popping its head out of the brush every couple minutes, always in front of them, and then it would watch them until it disappeared, only to show up further down the road. At first, they thought there was a pack of dogs since it had to have been going way faster than a dog could possibly run. They were getting a bit speechy at this point, so they decided to speed up. Their only issue was that the back of the van decided to pop open at that point. But they were due to see the dog show up at any second, so they decided if they went for a couple minutes without seeing the dog, the passenger would jump out and shut the back. They kept driving, but slowly, and they didn't see the dog. Finally, my sister stopped the car, and my friend ran to shut the back. As she got to the back, the white dog popped its head out behind the van. The girl jumps in the van, and they speed off. Looking in the rearview mirror, the dog slowly walks to the middle of the road and then just sits down, staring at them driving away. So has anyone else here seen the East 8 Mile Road ghost girl near Stockton, California? So here is my story. This was in late November or early December of 2012, and I was doing an install in a winery in Northern California. It was a long day because we were working out of town, so we worked late to get it finished in one day. I started driving home around midnight and had about a 3-hour drive back home to Oakland. It was about 1:30 a.m., and I was outside of Stockton, and I saw this girl standing on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. She was wearing a white dress that ended about 3 inches above her knees, and she was barefooted. She had long black hair flowing down her shoulders, and she was just standing still like a statue. I looked at her as I drove by, but she didn't move, didn't acknowledge my loud truck as it passed, or anything. I was pretty freaked out because you always hear stories like this and then she appears in your vehicle with you, but that wasn't the case, she just stood there in the night. The thing that was most weird to me was that it was cold that night, about low 40s, and it was drizzling a bit, and she was wearing a short dress and no shoes standing on the asphalt. If this was just some girl who does this for fun to freak people out, I feel like she would have been extremely cold and would be shivering, but this girl didn't move. Now that I got home, I was still thinking about it, so I searched Ghost Girl outside of Stockton, California, and I found a bunch of articles and stories about the East 8 Mile Road Ghost Girl, and most of the descriptions fit what I saw to a T. I never went back to that area because I moved to another state shortly after, but I want to travel back there and see what I can find one day. I grew up less than an hour's drive from Cuyahoga Valley National Park in northeast Ohio, and as a kid, my family would often take day trips to Virginia Kendall, the Gorge, and go on drives through the area surrounding the park. Back in the 70s, when the park was being built, the federal government bought up most of the land in an area called Boston Township and seized other property that people didn't want to sell to them, forcing a mass exodus from the area and a lot of abandoned buildings that are still standing if you know the right places to look. And as is expected, what was lost with the forced migration of residents was made up for in the growth of urban legends, giving Boston Mills the nickname Helltown. One night in the early spring of my 8th grade year, my parents decided to take us on an evening drive through Boston Mills and Cuyahoga Valley National Park. It was mid-March and early enough that it was still light out, but late enough that nightfall would be any moment. At this point in life, I was going through a phase where I was very interested in ghost stories and had read every page possible about the legends surrounding Boston Mills, satanic cults, ghosts, vagrants living in the woods, you name it. I was thinking about these things as we drove in and out of the deep woods. Though I had been heavily influenced by reading those stories and had a very active imagination as a kid, I know that what I'm about to describe is something that I saw beyond a shadow of a doubt and, at the time, actually took me off guard when I realized what was happening. After a few detours from the main road due to construction going on in the area, we found our way back and came around a curve in the road where there were a few old houses. A large yellow sign indicated a railroad crossing or some other traffic caution up ahead. By this time, it was almost dark, about 6:30 p.m., and the surrounding foliage made it almost impossible for us to drive without the high beams on in our old Dodge Caravan. As we approached the big yellow road sign, I caught sight of something, several somethings, actually, crossing the road. 3 or 4 shadowy figures are walking in a line and into the foliage. The last person in the line stepped onto the berm of the road just as our car drove past, and in that split second that we drove by, I could clearly see a line of about 10 people wearing dark, hooded robes and each carrying a burning candle walking into the woods in a perfectly straight line, almost as if they were gliding or floating. My 13-year-old self was stunned into silence, trying to decide if what I had seen was a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. No one else in my family appeared to have noticed it, and the drive home was uneventful. Several years later, I brought this story up with my mom and was brushed off. But 10 years later, I know what I saw in the woods of Boston Township on that March evening in 2008. Back in 2020, I experienced something very odd that I still think about. It started with my ex and me leaving around 6:45 p.m. We passed through a small town in California out in the middle of nowhere, miles outside the city. We crossed over a bridge, and from there, it seemed like it took hours to get to another town I liked to visit for the stars. The very small town we were going to visit as a spooky adventure. It's a very small town with a very low population, to the point where the population sign is faded and doesn't show anything legible that could be numbers. It's very secluded in the middle of nowhere with a ton of grass fields and where farmers commonly work the crops. We were driving on very windy roads, and it still felt like hours since we left, and I lost confidence in my way there for a short period of time since I often relied on memory to get there. I asked my ex to map the way to ensure we were heading in the right direction. It said 9 minutes. Okay, so we kept driving through windy roads with empty tall grass fields, dirt, mud, and occasional streams or small bodies of water, with the added canopy of trees to drive under in some parts of the way there. It felt like 30 minutes had passed by as compared to the estimated 9 minutes. I remember we checked again after we felt like 9 minutes had passed by, but in reality, the map said we still had 4 minutes before the arrival of the town Grimes, where commonly spooky happenings occur. In these 4 minutes, it felt like it was the remaining 21. We reached the entrance to the town, and the fields of grass slowly grew into small homes on each side of the road with stop signs and street signs, turning into the small town that it is. I took the first left upon driving through the town, and immediately there was a small dog sitting in the middle of the road. I told my ex not to approach it and to leave it alone, as I didn't have a great feeling about it. I let her get out of the car as she tried to check the small dog for a collar with a name tag and to see if the owners had been nearby. No one was outside. As she approached the dog, it went off, snapping at her and running away immediately, causing the other dogs and animals to go crazy in the distance. My ex ran back into the car, and I continued to drive. I took the next right turn, and as I drove, my ex asked, "Is that a satanic symbol on that person's house?" I mentioned it was possible, but admitted I hadn't seen it and was starting to get a little uneasy. She was too, and we were both anxious. Weird happenings started as soon as we reached the town. Following the road for a few streets, I took a left turn towards a church where I'd had a previous experience watching a cat turn into a human-like figure and dissipate into the distance about a year prior to this event. I park in front of the church, and we immediately get an overwhelming and uneasy feeling. The air was heavy and it was unpleasant. We both had goosebumps at this point. Meanwhile, there was a group of 4 people walking towards us in no real direction. We continued to stay parked until the people seemed like they were approaching the car. We heard their voices, but as I backed out onto the street and started driving past them, I don't recall seeing any of their faces, as if they didn't have any. Just blank skin. At this point, I drove up to an old friend's house and parked in the yard to see the house. This house was abandoned, as no one was living in it. It was an old Victorian home with 2 stories and many different rooms. Being inside this house many times, including staying the night and sitting in the house, always gave it a haunted vibe. Attached to the house is a watchtower and an old, broken-down workshop. I put the car in park, and my ex noticed the door to the workshop and watchtower had been opened. She got out of the car, and I followed her. We approached the beginning of some really deep stairs directly at the door. As soon as I stepped forward before her, I told my ex, "Don't, because I felt something bad, call it intuition." In the instance where I said that, the car's headlights instantly turned off. The doors to the car were already closed, and this is an old car, so the only way the lights turn off is with the manual switch next to the steering wheel. They turned on again as soon as we got back into the car. I proceeded to drive around the town some more and stopped at the church again. This time we started seeing things dash through the dark around us, and there had been a car behind me with its lights on just sitting there, disappearing completely. It made no sound while I was driving off, nor did I see it. It had completely disappeared from my rear view mirrors, and when I turned to look out the window, nothing was there. We also kept seeing the same truck driving around the town as if it were stuck in a loop. It was kind of eerie, but I reassured my ex that we were doing the same thing. At this point, the radio kept turning on and off while the car had been parked further down the road out of town. This was where we saw the sign to enter the town with its population value on it. At this point, we started driving back the way we came, and as I was driving, my ex noticed these weird signs pointing nowhere that said Morningstar, with an arrow next to it pointing out into the empty fields next to us with nothing in sight but tall grass and bushes. One sign even said Morningstar entrance and didn't point anywhere with anything in sight. We kept driving, and as we were heading back towards the next town over, we saw a car headlight approaching us from the other side of the road. As we were driving towards it, the lights just went out. We both saw it and mentioned it to one another. We kept driving. There was no car in sight that we ever passed up until leaving the next town over. I'm not sure what this experience was, but it was definitely something. By the time we got back, it was between midnight and 1 a.m. My friend and I slowly drove by a car that was stopped at a stop sign one night. The dome light was on, and all 4 passengers were sitting perfectly upright and staring straight forward, completely motionless, with their eyes wide open. As we passed the car, nobody moved or acknowledged that we were staring at them, and as we continued down the road, the car remained in that exact spot until we lost sight of them. When I was leaving my friend's house about 5 or 6 hours later, I was continuing down a different road, roughly about a half mile from where this strange occurrence happened, when I approached a car that was pulled over on the side of the road, headlights facing toward me. I slowed down and was going to see if they needed any help until I realized that it was the same car from earlier in the evening. All 4 passengers, like before, were sitting perfectly upright in their seats, staring straight forward with the dome light on, not acknowledging the fact that I was staring at them. I nearly came to a full stop as I was passing them until they all abruptly and in perfect unison turned their heads and looked directly at me. It was at that moment that I got this rush of fear deep down in my bones, and I slammed on the gas and took off down the road. But their car once again didn't move an inch whatsoever. They never pursued me or anything. One of the most bizarre moments that I can recall. My name is Kevin, and this is something that I will never forget. Something that will make me feel uneasy when driving at night for the rest of my life. I've read many stories on here, but nothing quite like what happened to me and my friend Paul, So please, if anyone has any information or anything, comment on here so I have some idea of what I saw. The other night, I was driving down a dirt road about 5 miles out of a small town. The town I was born and raised in has a population of about 1,200 people, so when I say small town, it's ducking tiny. Everyone knows everyone, and your business is basically out there, no matter what. So if you've ever done anything that's landed you in jail, you're basically getting dirty looks wherever you go. Anyway, that's irrelevant, I had to just throw that out there. Like I said, though, my friend Paul and I decided we were going to go out down the back roads, just cruising out of pure boredom. In a small town, that's what you do sometimes when there is nothing else to do. We were driving along at about 40 miles per hour when Paul tapped on my shoulder. Dude. He says it excitedly. What? I get annoyed at his aggressive poking, shrugging his finger away. There's a ducking lady just standing in the little field. His face was pressed against the window. What? Why? I figured it was his eyes playing tricks on him. How the duck would I know, dumb as she's just out there? He was right, a stupid question on my part. I slowed the car to a stop and leaned around him to get a look. I didn't see anything at first, but around a little tree, there she stood. She was hunched over from what I assumed was a bad back while looking straight ahead. She wasn't moving at all, she was just staring. There was something about this lady, I don't know what it was, but it was creeping me out. Why in the hell was she standing out in the woods in the middle of the night doing absolutely nothing? As we sat there for a minute, the silence grew unbearable. All of my senses were on full alert, and fear kicked in a way it never has before. Snap! A loud branch crashing down made me and Paul nearly shit our pants, and we shouted profanities at the same time, trying to find the source of the noise. The duck? I asked and turned to look at Paul. My blood turned ice cold the second I looked back at Paul. He must have seen the look on my face because he turned to see what scared me so badly. The old lady had her face pressed right up against the window, smiling wildly, and her eyes opened unnaturally wide. I don't know how I thought of it so quickly, but I hit the lock button just in time as I heard Paul's door try to open. Dude, Paul whispered. It was like we were both thinking the same thing as I reached up to start the car. Her eyes followed my hand to the keys, and that smile never left her face. I turned the ignition, and, thank God, it started right away. I slowly pulled forward, and the lady's face rubbed my car the whole way until she was no longer touching it. I looked in the rear view mirror and watched as she stared us down until she was a good 200 yards behind us. What in the actual duck? Paul shouted. I was stunned into silence, I couldn't even talk. My mouth felt like sandpaper, and my throat ached. Dude, how the duck did she get to the ducking car that fast? She was like a football field away. He was shouting. I don't know, dude. I finally found my voice. We looked away for only a second. We stared blankly, driving at probably 20 miles per hour, both of us scared shitless. We must have driven 3, maybe 4 miles, when Paul finally spoke again. We have to go back, dude. Are you ducking nuts? I shouted at his stupid idea. No, I mean, we were on a dead end. He pointed ahead to the dead end sign. You've got to be ducking kidding me. I honestly felt like crying. We drove a little further to the little turnaround spot and slowly turned the car around. What the duck? What the duck? Paul kept repeating. I looked his way, confused, then followed as if they were going to make her go away as we passed her. We flew right past her without hitting her by inches. I kept on driving and thought we were good, that is, until the engine started sputtering. No. I screamed at the top of my lungs. No, please, God, no. Paul was full of tears at this point. I couldn't do anything as the car slowed to about 5 miles per hour, spitting and sputtering. I gave it all the gas I had, and it wouldn't go faster. It never fully stalled but was running like a piece of shit. Jesus ducking Christ, Kev, we gotta go, she's ducking coming, man, Paul shouted. I looked back and squealed like a girl. The old lady was awkwardly running at our car with that crazy smile on her face. Holy duck, I shouted, repeatedly slamming my foot on the gas. Paul and I were both shouting at the car to go while frantically looking back as the lady got closer and closer to my car. I thought for sure we were going to be ripped apart by this demon posing as an old lady. Then, by the grace of God, the engine roared again, and the car sped away. She was maybe 15 feet away, and when it finally got going, Paul and I were both cheering as we watched her slowly fade out of view. We hauled our asses out of there and didn't feel safe until we got back into town. Even then, we constantly looked back, like she was going to appear behind us or something. Dude, no one is going to believe us about this, Paul said it with a little bit of a laugh. I know. Want to stay at my house tonight? I asked, not wanting to be home alone after that. I'm glad you asked, because I wasn't going home by myself after that. He answered, and we both laughed. We pulled into my house, went inside, and popped the TV on. After about an hour of watching TV, Paul dozed off, and I was up myself. I got up to use the bathroom, and when I stood up, I looked out the window and froze. There was the old lady, standing in the middle of the street, just smiling. I think I'm going to die, but I figured I'd get this out here and let everyone know to just be careful when driving down back roads at night. You never know what's out there. When I was 18, I was really into scary movies. I just had an urge to see or experience something scary. It was during this summer that I started researching haunted sites I could visit. Then one caught my attention, Sweet Hollow Road in Long Island. There are a bunch of popular urban legends linked to the site, and all of them have to do with a creepy underpass bridge. A few of the stories speak about the violent deaths of children. One day I told my cousin and brother, who were also ghost story fanatics, that we should visit Sweet Hollows. My cousin had just gotten his license, and my mom insisted on tagging along. When we finally got to the underpass, we found nothing. We didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The only scary thing we experienced at the site was that, due to the thin, zigzag-like road, we almost crashed into a tree. We thought the trip was a waste. But then something strange happened. The next morning, my mom swore that during the night she felt like someone or something was watching her from under her bed. On the other hand, the rest of us had dreamt of a small boy with black hair. He was pale, and none of us could remember his face. Until this day, we still believe that whoever we saw had to be one of the many children who had died at that bridge. I had been at my in-laws' home on that night, Friday, September 12th. We had been in the area for about a week at that point, when my kids and I flew in from San Diego. My in-laws picked us up at the airport and took us to their home. My parents live roughly 45 minutes away from my in-laws. After spending nearly a week at their home, it had been decided that the kids and I were going to leave after supper on Friday evening. I was borrowing my father-in-law's car, a 2011 Dodge Caliber, to drive to my parents for the week and then would drive it back to their house before we left to go back to San Diego. Dinner ran late that night. The kids didn't want to eat spaghetti, so my mother-in-law whipped them up a la carte items. Kids, man. By the time we were done eating, it was way later than I wanted to be leaving. Around 8:30 p.m. I helped clean up a bit, threw our luggage in the car, changed the kids into pajamas, and got them in their car seats to hit the road. This was around 8:45 p.m. It was dark by this time. So there's really only two long roads that I drive from one home to the other. 43 is a PA toll road and relatively new. I believe it was built or finished around 2002 or so. This road is never busy. Being that it's a toll road, it is the quickest way to get to Route 51, which leads directly into Pittsburgh, but there are other ways to get there that don't require a $3.25 toll. 51 is a busier road, but mostly during the day. My parents' home is only a stone's throw away from 51. As I'm driving on 43, I noticed that the road is particularly dead. I didn't see one other car headed northbound, and only a couple had passed headed the other way. This is where things get weird. My two kids were exceptionally cranky in the backseat. I distinctly remember looking at the clock and seeing that it was a few minutes after 9 p.m. This was typically around their bedtime, so that explained the crying from my 2-year-old daughter and the whining from my 5-year-old son. I was concentrating on driving and trying to soothe the kids by just talking to them in a calm voice. This wasn't really happening, they were both just done. As I was coming to the end of 43, I paid the toll and continued on that road until I got to the right turnoff to 51. Suddenly, my 2-year-old daughter let out a huge wail from the backseat. It was loud and different from her regular cry. I guess my mother's instinct took over, and I turned my head back to look toward her and make sure she was okay. As I looked back, I just remembered a very distinct, bright, and overpowering light. It's so incredibly hard to explain, it all happened very quickly, but it was like, as soon as I looked over my shoulder, I was met with a superlight that seemed to come out of nowhere. When I turned my head back to the road, I suddenly felt overwhelmingly confused and anxious. It was the strangest feeling I've ever experienced, really. But, when I got my bearings, I realized that I was now on Route 51 and no longer on Route 43. I was about 3 to 4 miles up Route 51 from where I would have turned onto the road itself. I glanced down at the car clock, 9:30 on the nose. The panicked feeling began kicking in, and I looked back at my kids in their seats. They were both sleeping, out like lights. The last time I remembered glancing at my clock was just after 9, I want to say it had been 9:03, but I am not 100% on that. Both of the kids had been awake and verbally fussy. The last clear memory I had was of my daughter letting out a loud wail or almost scream, looking back toward her, being met with a very bright light, and then turning my head back toward the road. I don't remember actually seeing either of the kids when I looked back. The light caught my eyes as I turned back. It scares the hell out of me to say this, but I still to this day have no idea how exactly we ended up 3 to 4-ish miles up the road and, more strangely, what happened between minutes after 9 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. I would estimate 25 or so minutes being unaccounted for. I had zero memory of turning on 51 and driving past certain landmarks I was familiar with. It would not have taken 25-ish minutes to get from where I remembered being to where I was via car. There were no cars in front of me or behind me when I looked toward the back seat, but when I came to, I was actually driving along with other cars on the busier 51. I was so weirded out that I actually pulled off the road and into a restaurant parking lot to check on the kids. I got out and examined them. They were both fine, breathing normally, and simply fast asleep. They seemed very peaceful, which crossed me as so weird considering they had been anything but the last I really remembered. Anyway, that's my story. I've told a handful of friends and family since this strange occurrence happened. No one has been able to offer an idea of what could have happened. This just happened a few hours ago as we were on our way back to Vegas. My husband was driving when a person came out of nowhere in the middle of the road, basically just standing there, not even waking or doing anything. Imagine we were in the middle of the desert, where basically nobody is living, as it is 100 miles away from civilization. It was dark, and this happened around 11:30 p.m. My husband saw him at enough distance to drive past him, but we can't get over the fact that we both saw him and are still wondering at this point who that guy could be, if he's a real person, and if he's safe when another car drives past him. I could have sworn it was a ghost we saw instead because the guy just came out of nowhere, but given the speed at which we were driving, we probably saw him at a distance where we could still have enough time to avoid him. But what boggles our minds is, what would that person be doing in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, where hardly anyone will be living? It is a desert. Also, if he was suicidal, and if he succeeded in that, I can never imagine the fear, hassle, and trauma it would have caused us. But we prayed, we always do anyway, and we believe we have been protected by God, and hopefully, the guy too is safe if he ever was a true person. I'm just so glad now that we are back in the city, but I know that I will still get goosebumps every time I have to tell this story. This all happened a couple years ago. To this day, none of us have any explanation for the events I am about to describe. It was the summer between my sophomore and junior year in college, and my twin brother Rob, my little brother Will, 2 friends, Steve and Manuel, and I decided we could use a good spook. We grew up with a fascination with the wilderness and the unexplained things that may or may not happen out there, and we were always trekking deep into the forest or looking for abandoned buildings to explore. My little brother Will, who is 2 years younger, is especially interested in weird and creepy stuff and is obsessed with the weird New Jersey books. If you've ever read Weird NJ or live in this state, you've probably heard of Clinton Road. Clinton Road is this old, winding country road in West Milford, Passaic County, that is supposed to be the most haunted road in the United States. There are stories of Satanists, Ku Klux Klan gatherings, Wiccan ritual sacrifices, ghost sightings, strange creatures, and various other wacky shit that people are generally not very cool about. Not to mention the actual fact that the infamous hitman known as the Iceman buried many of his victims near the road. The amount of lore and legend attached to this road is insane. So, as a bunch of shithead young men are wont to do, we decided it'd be a great time to go there some night and check it out. I think we were all hoping that something would happen on the road that would make us shit ourselves with fright. Of course, I know for myself that, going into this, I've always been skeptical of ghost stories and didn't expect anything to happen. I used to be pretty certain that supernatural stuff was a bunch of baloney, and I was really just going because I had nothing better to do that night. Honestly, I don't think any of us expected anything out of the ordinary to go down. We're all pretty level-headed guys, which makes what happened all the more difficult to understand. It got dark on the day we'd picked to make the trip. I think it was a Friday, 10:30 p.m. or so the 5 of us piled into Steve's car and headed off. We spent the drive shooting the crap and trying to freak each other out about what we might see. There are stories about a ghostly black pickup truck trying to run cars off the road there, so I kept telling them I saw a big truck coming up fast behind us, if only to amuse myself. Finally, we rode through one last lighted intersection and started onto Clinton Road. Being from an area that is equally rural as West Milford, I am used to dark country roads, so I wasn't surprised by how dark Clinton was. What was a little odd was how the darkness there felt heavier, almost like it was weighing us down and trying to swallow the car's headlights. The dense woods on either side weren't helping this oppressive feeling I was getting. I felt a little weird about all this, but we kept joking around with each other, and the mood was light as we drove along, so I kind of got over it. Clinton Road is long with lots of bends, so we were driving a while before we came to a little bridge. One story goes that some little boy got hit by a car going so fast around the corner, the turn is called Dead Man's Curve or some morbid shit like that he was killed instantly and thrown from the bridge. Apparently they had to recover his body from the stream, and his ghost is said to still hang out there, so if you flick a coin into the water below, he'll throw it back to you. Naturally, we had to try it, so Steve parked the car on a patch of gravel on the side of the road, and we went out into the black night. It felt even darker without the lights from the car, but we could just barely see what we were doing by the light of the half moon. We made our way over to the edge of the concrete bridge. It was obviously old and poorly maintained, the concrete was chipping in places. My neck stood up, and my eyes watered instantly. "Are you ducking kidding me?" I remember saying this in my fright and disbelief. Sure enough, there it was, a penny in the exact goddamn middle of the goddamn road, right in the goddamn middle of that goddamn mother ducking bridge. Our desire to explain it logically quickly took over, and we immediately accused Steve and or Manuel of being the asshole that dropped it there, because they were behind the rest of us and were also the most likely to pull that kind of shit. We argued for a while, but nobody fessed up. Still to this day, no one has fessed up to dropping that penny. The more time that passes, the less reason one of them has to keep up the lie, and the more unsure I am of what really happened on that bridge. Anyway, after that, I was pretty much done, ready to go home and crack open a beer. So, in the 80s, my mom was working the night shift at a factory. One night, she was driving down this road to work. It was deserted because it was nighttime, and this is a small neighborhood back road. All of a sudden, a little boy ran out in front of her car. She said he was blonde and was wearing a red and white striped shirt and blue jeans. She was 100% sure she hit him. She slammed on the brakes, got out of the car, and frantically searched for him. There was no kid. She checked all around her car, she checked the street, she checked the side of the road, there was no kid. She even looked at her car to check for marks on it, and she realized that she had never felt an impact. She was really shaken up by it. She continued on to work, worked her shift, and headed home. She gave two of her friends, who lived nearby, a ride home that night. As she was driving down this same road, traveling the other way, at the exact same spot, the same little boy ran out in front of her, only this time he was going in the opposite direction as well. Same deal, she slammed on the brakes, checked all around the car, and found no little boy. Her friends in the car said that they never saw a kid, but that she was white as a sheet, and they felt like she had seen something. She has lived here for 30 years since then and driven down that road many times, but she has never seen that little boy again. I have never seen him, but I also avoid that road at night. I was at the last rest area on I-90 West in Montana before you got to the Idaho border. I started my day hella early at 2 a.m. because I wanted to find parking in Portland, Oregon, early enough to see my family. I stopped to take a look at the rest area and checked on a strap that had come loose and was flopping in my mirror. I hop out, fix my strap, and walk inside to pee. I felt wide awake that morning, so I was very awake and not groggy at like 3 to 4 a.m. This place is up in the mountains, it's miles from anything resembling civilization, and it's a chilly early spring morning. The rest area has lights on that can be seen through the windows. There's only one truck at this rest area with their curtains pulled and no cars to be seen. At most, there might be one other person here in the rest area, but he's probably asleep. This rest area is unusual in the fact that it's 8 individual private bathrooms that surround the perimeter of the larger commons area instead of the typical one large bathroom area you typically see. Anyway, as soon as I start walking towards the rest area door, I feel a chill, and it keeps feeling colder as I walk towards the door. I look down at the curb to step up onto it, and as I look back up towards the rest area, I see a shadowy figure in the glass door of the rest area disappear off to the side of the window out of view. I remember thinking that it was odd that the lone guy in the truck must have gotten up to use the restroom, and I just saw his reflection in the window. I notice as I get right up near the building that the snow is mostly melted all around the area surrounding the rest area, but the snow near the building looks mostly unmelted. Also odd, but whatever, I gotta pee. I open the door and step inside. The place is so quiet inside that you could hear a pin drop. I pick one of the men's bathrooms and lock the door behind me. I walk up to the urinal and start doing my business. Just as I start to piss, someone tugs at the door handle behind me to see if it's locked. I've literally been in the bathroom for, maybe 5 seconds. At this point, all the hair on my neck stood up. I did not hear any footsteps outside or anyone coming in or out of the entrance door. Just as I was almost done at the urinal, I heard a rattling outside in the commons area that sounded almost like a janitor rolling a cart around. I stopped momentarily to listen. And then, all of a sudden, all of the toilets started flushing in every different bathroom room simultaneously. Literally, as soon as one toilet finished flushing, the one in the next bathroom would go off. I look over at the toilet, expecting to see a malfunctioning auto-flush toilet, but they're all old-school manual flush handles. My blood immediately ran cold because I was finally starting to grasp what was happening. I reach out my hand to grab the door handle. The flushing immediately ceases, and it's dead quiet once again. Hands visibly shaking at this point, I flip the lock open and quickly peek my head into the commons area. Nobody is there. I didn't believe in ghosts up until this day, so I wanted a rational explanation for what I just experienced. So I go looking in all the stalls since they're all indicating they're vacant. I literally verified that there's not a single soul there, and my blood runs cold again because I know for certain now that the only explanation was because of a poltergeist or someone's paranormal activity. Spooked, I exited the rest area on a fast walk. As I walk underneath the second street light, it shuts off. Keep in mind that it's still completely dark outside, and this shouldn't be automatically turning off at this hour. I take off, sprint back to my truck, and jump into the driver's seat. I sit there, just stupefied by what just happened, for a few minutes, looking at the rest area to see if I can catch a glimpse of the ghost or someone hiding and messing with me. Nothing. Another trucker pulls in next to me. He gets out of his truck to go inside the rest area. I wait to see what happens. He disappears into a stall for a minute and comes out. I can see in the window that he's looking around like I was, and he's taking glances over his shoulders as he walks back towards his truck. I roll my window down and wave him over to my truck to talk to him. I asked him if he saw anything unusual in there. "Were you in there messing with the toilets?" was his response. I shake my head no. We both kind of give each other what the duck looks and both haul asses out of there. If you use Trucker Path, you can look at the rest area to see exactly the layout of the room and the fact that there is a review that's been upvoted several times that just says ghosts. It would have been nice to get an actual warning like actual scary poltergeist shit goes on here. Also, this place rarely gets updated because it's in a literal dead zone of cell signal. I have lived in Port Moody for almost 20 years of my life, and I never encountered something like this until last week. I was driving through the roads of Anmore and heading towards Heritage Woods Secondary. Down the windy path, I had my super beam lights turned on as there were no streetlights. However, all of a sudden I see the back of an old lady that looked around 6 feet tall, wearing a bright pink robe and red stilettos, standing in the middle of the road with her back facing me. Immediately, I felt a chilling sensation that something was not right, and I sped up and swerved around her, afraid to look back. Luckily, my friend was in the car with me. She let out a chilling scream because she also felt something off about this old lady. We both looked at each other and realized that this lady was missing a face. Please let me know if anyone has had a similar experience in Port Moody. Is this place haunted? A couple of years ago, I was taking some classes at an extension of a local college. The campus was spread out and had buildings in the town, 35 miles from home. One class got out late and usually left me getting home around midnight. This particular night I stopped by Walmart to pick up some groceries because midnight shopping is the best because there is no crowd. It was late January, and the weather was extremely cold. The inversion was bad, and the fog that settled in was unusually thick. There were patches of clarity that showed that there was no moon that night. I have driven the road a million times, and even with the fog, I could identify my location easily. As I came around a corner, the road came up a big hill and then gradually headed south. The road was wide but was surrounded by a shallow canyon. As I was leaving the canyon, I came into a patch of fog that was so dense that I had to slam on the brakes because I could not see more than 10 feet in front of me. The fog caught all the stray light in the area and immediately illuminated everything with a bright orange glow. Suddenly, I see something dart in front of my car. It was on its hands and feet, but it looked like it belonged on its hind legs. Its forelegs were short and covered with dense fur, and its hind legs were too long for it to be something that usually stood on 4 feet. Its hind legs were also covered in dense fur, but it had loose, flowing skin. My first thought was that I almost missed hitting a little boy that was playing in the road, except the boy was covered in fur. I stopped the car and watched as the creature ran across the road, loping along with very childlike movements. My heart was pounding, and I waited to see what it would do next. It padded off the side of the road and climbed up the embankment on the other side. Once atop it, it turned and looked at me. It had a cat-like face, but once again, it looks like a boy in costume or pajamas. It was clearly an animal, but it was so human-like that it scared me for weeks after. I looked up images on Google and came to the conclusion it was a juvenile bobcat with extremely disproportionate legs, but something about it still unsettled me. A few weeks had passed, and I had forgotten most of it. Driving the same road in similar circumstances, I came upon the same patch of fog. It was so thick. It was like someone had dropped a blanket over my car. I slowed to a crawl and looked for the road sign that signaled that I was halfway home. As I drove past it, I noticed a man leaning up against it. He was wearing a gas mask from World War II. He looked directly at me and shook his head disapprovingly. I freaked out and picked up speed. I wanted nothing to do with whatever he was there for. Outside of the fog, the night was crystal clear, and the moon was full, providing excellent visibility. As I made my way out of it, a few hundred yards later, there was a deafening crack. I instinctively slumped in my seat and thought I had been shot at. But there had been no other cars, no buildings, and no other people around for at least 15 miles. A quick scan of my windows showed no cracks or holes. Panicking because I knew I was so alone, I sped up the car. A second or two later, there was another deafening crack. Then a third, and then a fourth. Suddenly, my windshield was cracked, with lines through every portion of it except the driver's side. The windshield was only a few months old and had no chips, bubbles, cracks, or flaws before that night. The next morning, when I looked at my windshield, there were obvious impact marks in 4 to 5 places, but it was impossible to know where they came from. After the inversion cleared that winter, I never had another unusual experience on that road, but it still creeps me out to drive it at night in the winter. Palisade, Nebraska. Here is what happened. I was driving through the Midwest, going up to visit Mount Rushmore. I was taking minor highways most of the way because I enjoy scenic drives, but I started running low on gas in western Nebraska. I drove with my gas light on for about another 20 miles through nothing but empty fields when I finally saw a sign for a town, Palisade. I turned in and saw probably the most podunk town I had ever seen, and I live in the country. Seriously, there was not a single car on the road, and only a couple parked around randomly. I pulled into a small, single-pump gas station and noticed that there was no credit card input for the pump. No big deal, I thought, so I turned and tried to go into the small service shack that was by it, but the door was locked and the lights were out. I looked through the window, and the shack was completely empty, like it had been abandoned. I got in my car to try my luck going to the next town, but my wife told me she needed to use the restroom. So, I drove down Main Street past boarded-up windows and empty stores and parked at the local post office. It was closed. I was 30 minutes too late. So, I started to tell her that there was absolutely nothing open in this town when I saw a door that consisted of plywood instead of glass in a shop that had a busted window open and a couple people walk out carrying a bag. So, we walked over, while being stared at the whole time by the people who came out, and pulled open the plywood door and entered a narrow, extremely dark, dirty, disorganized, practically unstocked country store that employed a single worker at the front who was a bigger, burly guy wearing a greasy set of overalls and a trucker hat. It's a little hard to describe, but he seriously looked straight out of a horror movie. I asked the guy behind the counter if there was a restroom that we could use, but he either had trouble hearing or trouble understanding, so I repeated myself louder and slower. Twice. Finally, he heard, understood, and told me in the thickest country accent possible that it was in the back. Then he repeated himself, giving me extremely detailed directions on how to get to it when I could practically see it from where I was standing. He then proceeded to repeat himself a third time, going into excruciating detail on the perils I may face in going to the bathroom, such as low toilet paper or boxes in the way. I finally thanked him and walked to the back, and sure enough, there were dirty, dusty boxes of empty, used cleaning supplies strewn about everywhere that we had to step around before we got to the door. I opened it, and the sight made a truck stop bathroom look like a palace. Luckily, my wife did not notice the half-dozen roaches scurrying off, probably because the whole place was so dark, but she did notice the mold all over the walls, the puddle of an unknown substance on the floor, and the 50 or so empty toilet paper rolls strewn about. I asked her if she was okay, and she hesitantly told me that she would be fine and that she really had to go. I started walking around the store while constantly being silently stared at by the guy in front. I grabbed a bottle of water to buy. I always buy something if I'm going to use the restroom at a place, when my wife finally came out of the restroom. When I went to the front to pay for it, he finally asked me if I found the bathroom okay. I told him that we did, paid for the bottle of water, and left with him staring at us the entire time. As we walked out, there were a few people across the street having a conversation, but they immediately stopped and stared at us. So, I ignored them the best I could, got in the car, and started driving off, but I noticed a car parked at the one-pump gas station as I passed it, fueling. I did not care though. I got out of that town before it went into full twilight zone and was able to make it to the next town before I ran completely out. Driving through the backwoods of eastern Kentucky in the dead of night is the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Anyone who's ever been in the area knows exactly what I'm talking about. All the light from the moon and the stars is blocked by thick vegetation and hills, so it's pitch black. There's history in those hills, a lot of history, and this energy fills the place with this crazy bad vibe. It's like the very land is pissed at you, like it wants you dead. The roads aren't well traveled, and you'll be hard-pressed to see a single car driving down them at night. Cell service out there is, at least for me, spotty at best, non-existent at worst, and you pray to whatever you believe in that your car doesn't break down, knowing full well that the folks who live smattered across the hills are isolated, private people, knowing that they wouldn't be very happy seeing you wandering onto their property in the dead of night. I'm not too happy at all. It's what my mom calls bad country, in one word. She always told me to avoid the area if I could, saying that I'd likely be murdered or worse out there. And I've heard the stories too. Stories about people getting out of their cars to help a stranded motorist, only to be ambushed, robbed, kidnapped, and/or murdered. Stories about strange lights and ghost killers, vanishing hitchhikers, and crazy and bred hillbilly families. There are said to be hundreds of unreported deaths out there, people just vanishing off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. I've always avoided driving through those hills, but one night I found myself driving straight down KY 52 South instead of I-75 South, straight into those hills, straight into their darkness. Around midnight, I got a message from my mom that my dad had been taken to the hospital and that his condition was serious. I immediately jumped out of bed and into my car, despite my mom telling me to wait until morning to drive down. I lived up in Richmond at the time, while my parents were down in Hazard. It's a little under a 2-hour drive via I-75 South and a little over 2 via KY 52 South. That night, though, I-75 South was closed due to an overnight bridge reconstruction project, so I had to take KY 52 southbound, and it goes through some pretty gnarly bad country. I figured nothing would happen, that it'd be a smooth, yet anxiety-ridden, 2-hour-ish trip, but there was this dread I couldn't shake boiling up in my gut, urging me to wait until morning. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had to see my dad. I got from Richmond to Irvine just fine, driving the winding road and hilly terrain with ease and going faster than the speed limit. It was from Irvine to Jackson that things took a turn for the worst. First off, it was dark. Really ducking dark, and even with my brights on, they still barely lit up the surrounding area. The constantly curving roads didn't help either. I found myself slowing down, having to navigate through the dark, around switchbacks and turns, inclines and depressions, hoping to God I didn't run off the road or hit an oncoming vehicle. And the dread was at the forefront of everything now. Sure, it could have been exacerbated by worry for my dad, but there's something about those hills, something evil, and I was really ducking afraid. The radio was dipping in and out, so I put in a CD, Dio, and tried to drown out the fear with music, but after the first song, I turned off the stereo completely and drove in silence, all my senses on high alert. It felt wrong. It felt like I was being watched. Every so often, I would see a light flash in the woods, like a campfire but brighter. And I swear, at one point between Crystal and Beattyville, there was this pale, hairless, and huge humanoid running after my car next to the road. I swear, I saw it in the rearview mirror. It disappeared into the darkness and the trees when I braked and spun around in my seat. 30 minutes out of Beattyville I saw a kid. He was wearing a yellow shirt, blue shorts, and a red jacket, hood up, colors that reminded me of Superman. He wasn't wearing shoes. That bothered me. I flicked my brights down to their normal strength and slowed to a crawl, wondering what the hell this kid, who looked to be under 10, was doing out in the middle of bum duck nowhere. I made sure my doors were locked, cracked my window, and asked him if he was okay as I rolled toward him. He didn't respond. I glanced down at my phone. No service. Shit. I asked him if he was okay again, and he looked up at me quickly, making his hood fall down. He was crying. I slowed to a stop, and he immediately ran over, sticking dirty fingers into the crack of my window and pounding on the door. He was screaming something about how they were hunting him and that they were going to let the monster eat him, and they were watching us now, waiting, just beyond the darkness. At this point, I was seriously freaking out, and I might have been screaming too. I tried to roll my window up while trying to not hurt the kid, but he wouldn't release his grip on my window. I think he was trying to break it. A bright light flashed onto us, and the kid screamed even louder, let go of my car, and began running down the road, back towards Beattyville. And, I'm ashamed to say, I took off. I was afraid I was going to die and become another statistic on these hills. In my rearview mirror, I watched as what looked like 3 men in hooded robes ran out onto the road. The spotlight one of them was holding was trained onto my car and hit the mirror at an angle that blinded me, but it looked like the other two were going after the kid. I blinked and looked back towards the road, speeding like a bat out of hell. I pulled off in Jackson and drove straight to the police station. 2 detectives and an FBI agent who happened to be in town working with a liaison listened to me with grave faces. When I was finished, the FBI agent thanked me, then told me that a kid had gone missing the day before from a Bible camp near the Kentucky River. He said that's why he was in town in the first place. Apparently, the kid and his friends were out playing hide and seek in the woods in broad daylight when he just disappeared. He was wearing yellow, blue, and red, like Superman. The strange thing is, his footsteps just stopped, and his shoes were still there. It was like he was lifted off the ground by the air. It was weird. Half a dozen cop cars with twice as many cops, the agent, and a search and rescue team were dispatched to the area within minutes after I reported what I'd seen. I drove to a local diner and ended up staying in Jackson until morning, making the 40-minute drive down to Hazard after the sun rose. After hearing why it took me so long to get down there, my mom was beside herself with panic but was also glad I was okay, telling me I did what I had to do to survive, that I was brave, and that I wasn't a coward. My dad ended up making a full recovery. If you're wondering if I do feel like a ducking coward or if I regret not letting that kid into my car, the answer is a resounding yes. I do. I am. It haunts me to this day. But I don't know what would have happened if I stayed there any longer, and I don't know if either of us would have made it out alive. No trace of the kid was ever found. I went to a college that was far enough away to move out of my parents' house but close enough to visit them for the occasional weekend. Naturally, on those weekends I'd eat all their food, do my laundry, and generally take advantage of the situation all Saturday and Sunday, and then realize I'd needed to be on the road hours ago if I wanted to get back and get a decent night's rest for Monday morning class. One such evening, the sun had set hours ago, and I was taking the Blue Gum/Bayless shortcut to get to my school, CSU Chico. This road turns off of I-5 onto a dark, winding road that follows the Sacrifice River. Eventually, this road ends at a forest where there is a T-junction, Google Map, and you have a choice. You can go left, or you can go right. I needed to go left. At this time of night, there's nobody on those roads, but for safety, I glanced right to make sure there wasn't anybody coming and then looked left as I turned the wheel to go in that direction. There was somebody on the road to the left. They were standing in the middle of the road, bathed in moonlight, about 40 feet away. They were looking at me. There was very little movement, just an occasional shifting of weight from one foot to the other. This was a real person, not a dummy prank, and they were smack in the middle of the road I needed to use. I'm not a huge guy, but I'm not tiny either. I don't scare easily. Especially when I'm behind the wheel of a ton of steel and aluminum and the potential threat is sporting nothing but jeans and a t-shirt. Should I go with him? Should I wait? This whole portion of road is elevated, so there's not really any shoulder to prevent your car from careening 10 feet down into forest or farmland. Then I caught movement in the forest directly in front of me, illuminated by my headlights. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I glanced over quickly, but I didn't see anything out of place. I just rested. In the near panic, I stayed still. Eyes straight ahead, my peripheral vision keeping tabs on the dude to my left. If there were 2 of them, I wanted to know. After about 10 seconds, he appeared. From behind the tree directly in front of me, a face leaned out. He was white, tall, and big. He was so close that I could see that his eyes had dilated from the light of my headlights. He mouthed something, but I couldn't. Movement from the left. Guy number 1 was charging. I stomped the gas and cranked the wheel right as guy number 2 came around the tree and followed in suit. My poor old car took a moment to get going, allowing both guys to reach it in time. I could hear their hands slapping against the panels, reaching for purchase. Finding none, they were left behind, and I was blasting my way down winding, riverside roads I'd never before driven, let alone in the dark. It took me 2 hours to find my way out of that mess. I wasn't familiar with the terrain, and the smartphone coverage wasn't great. Eventually I found service and made my way back by means of an alternate route. I never took the Blue Gum/Bayless shortcut again. I wanted to take the time to describe a terrifying experience that I recently had during my travels for work. To this day, logic still defies the events that transpired, and they have haunted me ever since. I am still afraid to stop my car at highway rest areas to this very day. I recently landed a position in sales with a very solid company in the medical device industry. Being in my mid-20s, I am thrilled to work for such an innovative company. The money is great, the job is fun, and hell, they even gave me a company vehicle. That's a great perk. The only downside to the job is that my sales territory is quite expansive and covers several states, and because of budget constraints, they expect me to drive to most of my customers. I could not complain, however. Not many people my age get these kinds of opportunities. I finished up my workday at a hospital in central Pennsylvania when I received a phone call from a clinic in western New York that wanted to place a buy for my products, but before they could do so, they wanted a product demo. Not wanting to lose the opportunity, I agreed to be there by 9 a.m. My GPS showed the trip to be 5 hours if I took a highway that cut through the Allegheny forest. Being that it was now 5 p.m., I figured that I could make the drive now since I had a bag packed with extra scrubs, toiletries, and product manuals from my current trip. I headed to a gas station, filled my SUV, purchased some snacks and 2 energy drinks, and hopped on the single-lane highway north towards New York State. It was the middle of November and quite cold, with the sun setting early and giving way to darkness in the late afternoon. By the time I started my drive, it was already dark. Thick clouds were obscuring the moonlight. A wall of trees surrounded my vehicle on both sides, making it seem that I was driving my SUV through a tunnel of wood and darkness. The headlights from my vehicle illuminating the staggered white lines separating the lanes of the highway were the only source of light. The drive definitely took on an ominous feel. I thought nothing of it as I slugged back my energy drinks and listened to some comedy podcast to pass the time. When I was about 2 hours into my drive, the inevitable happened when one had large amounts of caffeine and a belly full of gas station snacks. I had to find a restroom eventually, which I was okay with since I wanted to get out of the car and stretch my legs anyway. I had passed a small town about 15 minutes ago, and I knew that I would need to find another one and pull off the highway or see if there was a rest stop anywhere ahead. Almost as if fate had heard me beckoning, I saw a sign that said, "Rest area 2 miles." This is my lucky night, I thought as I realized that I would not have to resort to relieving myself in the middle of the woods on a dark and creepy night. I came upon the rest area, which was located right off the side of the highway. It was nothing like the rest areas one is used to encountering on major highways. There were no restaurants or vending machines. There was a single, lonely picnic table and a garbage can on a patch of grass, as well as 2 separate brick buildings with brown metal roofs on them. A single overhead street lamp barely illuminated my oasis as it was flickering on and off, probably from neglect considering how remote this place was and how little use it was getting. The building to the left housed the ladies' restrooms, while the one to my right housed the men's restrooms. I placed my car in one of the 10 available spots in front of the buildings and grabbed my phone to keep me entertained while I took care of business. As I walked on the narrow concrete walkway towards the restrooms, I caught a glimpse of something in the woods behind the rest area. It was still quite dark outside, and the overhead light provided too little illumination to discern what I was looking at. All I could see at that distance was an obscure black shape shifting through the thick trees. It could have simply been my eyes playing tricks on me since I had spent the better part of the day either in a brightly lit operating room or driving down a pitch-black highway. I shrugged my shoulders and made my way into the men's room. There were 3 stalls at the far end of the restroom, flanking 3 urinals. 2 flimsy overhead lights with exposed bulbs were the only sources of light. One of the panels had a bulb completely out, and the other was flickering sporadically, making the entire room look like it was lit by strobe lights in a nightclub. Just F-king perfect, I thought. I'm stuck in the creepiest bathroom in the world, and I can barely see anything. I decided not to make a deal about it, I'd be back on the road shortly. I took the stall in the middle. I had no reason why, I'd simply randomly selected it. I sat down and nearly jumped from how cold the seat was. This was becoming quite an annoyance. At that moment, I had no idea, but things were about to get a whole hell of a lot worse. As I was in the midst of doing my business, the lights went out. Of all the times that this pathetic, single tubular bulb could have called it quits, it had to do so when I was using a restroom in one of the most isolated spots in the state. "You've got to be F-king kidding me," I groaned out loud. At this point, the light from my phone was the only source of light, cutting through the shroud of darkness that crept over the entire room. It was only at this point that I realized how quiet it had been this entire time. Aside from the sound of the slight breeze outside hitting the building, it was dead silent. I sat there in silence, playing games on my phone, when I first heard it. At first, it sounded like a faint shuffling sound, the obscure noise of someone or something making its way towards the entrance of the restroom. I found this rather odd because I would have heard another vehicle pull up since the parking lot was right across from the 2 buildings. The shuffling then became more discernible. It was footsteps. Slow, trudging footsteps were making their way into the restroom. By how loud they were, whoever or whatever this was had entered the room. As the footsteps continued, I noticed that they were making a slapping sound against the tile floor. It was as if this person, or thing, was barefoot. The footsteps became heavier and louder, and I noticed that they were moving towards the stalls. I locked my phone screen and sat there frozen with fear. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and sweat started to creep across my brow despite the chill in the air. By this point, along with the heavy, slapping footsteps, I heard the breathing. This thing's breathing was too otherworldly to be human. It took long, heavy, animal-like breaths and exhaled in a way that resembled an asthmatic, with a faint whistle at the end. I had never heard of such a thing. By this point, my bowels were completely voided from fear, and I was grateful that I had been sitting on a toilet, for I would have SH'd in my pants had I not been. This foreboding presence continued to trudge towards me until I heard its heavy breaths right outside the door to the stall. In the pitch-black restroom, all I could hear was this thing breathing a mere few feet away from me, now certain that it was aware of my presence. My heart continued to pound as I heard it shuffle around outside of the stall. I had never felt so helpless in my life. I was trapped here, at the mercy of this creature. After what I imagine was several minutes, the breathing quieted down some. I had pulled my feet up, and I was squatting on the toilet in fear of this thing seeing me. I knew that it was still there, but for whatever reason, call it curiosity or perhaps a fear-induced lack of judgment, I took out my phone and flicked up the flashlight app and pointed it at the floor underneath the stall door entrance. I nearly dropped my phone in horror at what I saw. 2 massive feet were pointed straight at me. They were unbelievable large, too large to be human. From the other side of the room, those heavy, slapping footsteps. Jesus Christ, there are 2 of them, I thought as terror pierced every muscle in my body as I lay limp on the floor. I heard the second set of footsteps grow closer. As I prepared to meet my fate, where I'd no doubt be torn in half by 2 forest beasts, that's when the face-off happened. Both creatures began to growl at each other back and forth, as if locked in some sort of display of alpha male aggression. After several exchanges, they made their move. I heard the sound of flesh hitting flesh and bodies slamming up against the walls. I flicked my flashlight app back on and pointed it towards the noise as I looked from under the stall. The 2 creatures were locked in a life and death melee. They were growling inhumanly as they pushed each other back and forth, blood spilling onto the floor from what I imagined was them clawing and biting at each other in this life and death struggle. As their battle continued, one began to back away out of the entrance to the men's room, and the other followed in a frantic sprint. I still heard their inhuman growls as their battle continued outside until their voices trailed off into a barely audible drone in the woods. As terrified as I was, I got to my feet and exited the stall. I pointed the light from my phone against the floor. There was dark red blood and tufts of grayish-brown fur all over the floor. It looked like someone had dressed an animal carcass in here. The stench was unbearable. It smelled like the inside of an animal cage at the zoo. What the hell were these things? I was not going to stick around and find out. I sprinted back to my car, entered, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of the parking lot like I was in a street race against death. My truck tires screeched as I careened out of the entrance and back onto the highway. I was covered in sweat and hyperventilating, having narrowly escaped a horrible death at the hands of some primal beasts from a forgotten era. I sped the rest of the way to my destination in New York. I arrived and checked into a hotel. I sat at the bar and downed several scotches before even dropping my bags in the room. My rattled nerves settled down eventually, and I made my way to my room. I lay on the bed sleepless, but sure of 2 things, I was not taking that route back home, and I was never stopping at a rest stop ever again.